Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for Blue Water Cruising Association for hosting this event. Power generation is how do you recreate energy? It's like earning money. It's like having a salary, a job. It's one thing to have a bank account. Congratulations, you have a bank account. And mom and dad could have dropped 1,000, they could drop 10 grand, they could have dropped 100. But at one point, you will run out of money. And you need to ask yourself, how will I replenish that battery bank? Right? Because the battery might become full from the store, and that's great, like having 10 grand in the bank account, but what are you going to do when you run out? Because eventually the battery will drain and you need to replenish it. So batteries need to be recharged. And that recharging either happens through chargers, inverter chargers, alternators, there's even wind generators, there's tow generators, DC generators, AC generators. There's all different ways of recharging a battery, and we're going to look at some of them. We're going to be talking about a charger right here on the slide, right? A charger is a converter. We're going to talk about an alternator. We're going to talk a lot about solar, and we're going to talk a little bit about fuel cells. But also, an alternator is really sort of in a DC, well, not a DC generator, but a wind turbine, or a tow gen are really very similar to alternators, right? Something's rotating and spinning and creating an output. So all those devices would always be connected to your unswitched distribution. Chargers used to be called converters. That word died because they would overcharge batteries, and so the marketing departments were smart enough to abandon that word. It's like certain names in history are never given to children again. Right? There's certain names from World War II that nobody's ever had again as a kid. And a converter is not a name that nobody's giving to any devices anymore. They just simply don't do it. It is the device, but nowadays they call them chargers. And when they call it a charger, what they're trying to symbolize is that it's a 3-stage battery charger. So it goes through bulk, absorption, float. Converters were just devices that would convert AC to DC. And in comparison, an inverter inverts DC to AC, right? So convert and invert are just mirror opposites of one another. So a battery charger, what's the fuel for a battery charger? And honestly, that question happens 500 times a year. And people say, what happens when I'm running my engine? Does my battery charger work? And the answer is no. A battery charger needs an AC source. And it's confusing because you're thinking alternator, AC, alternating current, right? Same word. But that's just bad choice of words. The reality is that your charger on your boat, your converter, will only work if it senses AC. And the input is AC. It can either come from shore power, right, connected at a dock, or running an AC generator. Running your main engine, propulsion engine, will not involve the charger whatsoever. And that's a really good concept that is often overlooked, is that your charger has no bearing when your engine is running, unless you're running the generator at the same time. But when you're underway and you've got propulsion, your battery charger is not at play. Meaning your battery charger could be shot, it could be thrown overboard, it could be dropped in the ocean, doesn't matter. Your battery charger has no involvement and is not at all related to when your engine is running. Okay? Those are completely separate things. And that's important for troubleshooting because sometimes you're going to lose one, but you don't lose the other. Most boats have a battery charger and an alternator. Most of us. Okay? So it's not uncommon to have both devices. Now, of course, if you're a cruising sailboater and you're going offshore, and you value money, you're not going to be connecting to shore power all the time because docks in places that are nice destinations outside of British Columbia are extremely expensive, and people tend to shy away from going to marinas for reasons of cash flow. It's just ridiculously expensive. You can't do it every day. It's like staying in a hotel room, you know, on a 10-year journey. At one point, you need deep pockets for that. And so most people end up anchoring, and they recharge their batteries, not with battery chargers, but with alternators. But for now, what we're going to talk about is a battery charger. Battery charger can either be single output or multiple outputs, right? They can have one battery connected to it or a battery bank, it doesn't matter. But they can have up to 3 battery banks. One example would be a sailboat would be house batteries. Could be made of 1 or 10 batteries, it doesn't matter. That's a bank. and then an engine start battery, and maybe a windlass battery, or a thruster battery, right? So you could have sailboaters. I think about hunters, and bigger the boats, eventually they start having thrusters because they have a lot of side winds and the decks are pretty high nowadays. And so you're docking a 50-foot sailboat or 45-foot sailboat, it's not unusual to have a bow thruster. That bow thruster might have a battery bank. And so you have a battery charger that might have an output for the engine battery, the house battery, and the thruster battery bank. And remember, a battery is not a single thing. It could be made of, a bank is made of multiple batteries or a battery. So a battery charger can charge multiple battery banks. Okay? So it's either 1, 2, or 3. I've never seen a 4. I'll go, that doesn't mean they don't exist, but I've never seen a 4. So in this case, this battery charger, powered from AC, is charging to an engine battery and is also recharging a house battery. Okay? Notice how important it is. There's fuses. 95% of you, unless we did work on your boat, don't have fuses on your battery charger circuit. 95% of you. And the reason is men are too good and too infused with knowledge to read a manual. And so it's dumb to read a manual. And they don't do it. And that includes the manufacturers, by the way. Every single person that's ever worked on your boat, most people are simply born with the gift of knowledge. And so, unrelated though, they make errors, but they're not there to realize that they've made those errors. And so 95% of you do not have battery chargers that are fused. And if they are fused, they fuse them at the wrong place because, again, they didn't read the manual. So look for your battery charger fuses, and they should be at the engine and the house battery. But in this case, if it's connected to an unswitched distribution, which it should, the fuse is right here, right? Or in some cases, if it's a smaller boat, like, I don't know, you have a 26 or 30-foot boat, and it doesn't have endless stuff on it, because there are 30-foot boats that have a lot of gear on them. Like a cutwater, for example, has crazy, it's as big as a 45-footer in gear. They won't have all the connections to the battery because there's just way too much things on a 30-foot cutwater. So they have also what are called unswitched distribution, because otherwise the battery post would have 20, 30 connections on it. So that's what a battery charger does. It basically, recap, charges your boat from a shore power, from an AC source, either shore or gen, right? Smart battery chargers reduce the time it takes to charge your batteries. In the past, battery chargers, before being smart, when they used to be called converters, they were overly cautious on the charge time, but then they overshot. And it's not uncommon to hear boaters that were boating in the 70s and 80s that would never be able to leave their battery charger on their boat 24/7. They would actually, I talked to club members, they would go down to their boat before they go on a trip, and they would actually turn on the charger overnight before they go, because they knew that if they left their charger on for a month or 2 months, they would boil their batteries. The chargers were overly charging at the top end, at the end, and they would basically, the word float is a recent word. They would trickle charge. Nobody uses trickle charging anymore. Trickle charging, again, is a marketing word. It's a word that we define a definition to, and that would cause the batteries to boil over. So boaters that have old chargers end up having to literally manually turn their charger on or off, because if they leave it on for a month or 2 months, they'll come back and their batteries are going to be completely empty. The electrolyte, even if it was an AGM, they kill it. You can't save an AGM that's overcharged. And you can't change a flooded lead acid battery if it's overcharged too. If it's dry, it's done. And those batteries, you get that sense of, it smells like rotten eggs. That's the smell you come on board. So you want a smart battery charger. If it doesn't say smart on it, it's not smart. Trust me. Mercedes always puts their logo on a car. They don't build a car without putting their sign on it. If it was smart, they would label it smart. Nobody's going to put a product and not advertise their product if it is what it is. It'd be crazy. It's like there's no AGM battery that doesn't brag about being AGM. It'd be, why would you do that? I mean, people were like, why do I pay twice? Oh, it's a hidden AGM. You don't know, surprise. No, it's not going to work like that. Okay? So you want to make sure that your battery charger is a smart battery charger. And if you have a good battery charger, your battery life is going to be what you would have hoped for, if you don't deplete the batteries too low. But if you've got a good battery charger and it's the right size and it's a smart one, and your batteries are never depleted below what we talked about, the 50%, 30%, 20%. And if you love your batteries and you have the right charger, your batteries are going to give you a good life. But the charger is essential. You got to make sure it's 3-phase, right? The other thing, 3-phase is what we talked about earlier. We had a question, bulk absorption float, right? So think about that 7-course dinner. You're chowing down, you're super hungry, you haven't eaten for a day. Your first 4 courses go down like no problem. Around 5 and 6, you're taping off. Like it's hard. But you're powering through because you want to get to the top. And then once you get to 7, you're like, that's it, I can't do no more. And then you go to float. Okay, you want a charger that has float. If it says trickle charge on it, it's not worth having on your boat. It's an anchor. It's dead weight. Get it off your boat. You want a battery charger that can allow, and we had a question earlier about having, if you've got AGM batteries and you're changing to AGM, well, if you're going to AGM, you need a battery charger that has an AGM charge profile on there. Because you can't have an AGM battery on a flooded lead acid profile. You can't do that. Well, you can, but again, your battery life is going to be shorter than you want. You also want chargers that are temperature compensated. I want to emphasize, this is so critical. When we think about battery voltages, we're thinking about numbers like 14.4, 13.3, 12.6, 12.2, 10.5. All those numbers, if you've ever heard them and you're thinking, oh yeah, you're talking about absorption voltage, float voltage, full battery, 50%, dead. Those numbers are all at a temperature compensated battery of 77 degrees Fahrenheit. The moment the battery temperature goes lower, the voltage goes higher. If the temperature of the battery goes higher, the voltage needs to go lower. There's an inverse correlation between battery temperature and voltages. So in the summer, when you're charging your batteries, if you had a temperature compensated charger, your voltages are going to be lower than you would ever see. You'd be like, oh, that's weird. My batteries never made it to 14.4. They only made it to 14.1. Is my charger damaged? No, it's your batteries are warm. The water is now warmer. The ambient air is warmer. But in the winter, now it's much colder and you're boating. I see batteries that go up to 15 volts. People are freaking out. I'm like, okay, all right, let's calm down. All good. All right, I'm going to walk you through this. Disconnect your temperature sensor from your charger. And let's see what happens. And then suddenly the voltage drops to 14.4. I'm like, you can please yourself by undercharging the batteries and staying at 14.4. It's the same thing. I eat more in the fall and the winter than I do in the summer. Again, remember that human analogy? Batteries are like people. I have a bigger appetite in the winter when it's colder than I do in the summer. I eat lettuce, salads, super light things in the wintertime. Don't give me that. I'm preparing for like the dark days. I'm like getting ready for hibernation. Your batteries are exact same thing. They want higher voltages in the cold temperature, lower voltages. And if you have a temperature compensated charger, guess what's going to happen to your batteries? They're going to live longer, right? And that's why you want a temperature compensated battery charger. So I'm giving examples of different chargers. I want to emphasize, this is ignore at your peril. Ignore at your peril. And I get that, oh my God, at least 3 times a week. Question, Jeff, my batteries are dead. My charger doesn't work. I'm going to go to Canadian Tire and I'm going to buy a cheapo battery charger and I'm going to connect it and I'm solved and I won't see you until May because I solved my problem. I'm like, you should, yeah, sure, yeah, absolutely, no problem. Just so you know, a marine battery charger does this lovely thing of not actually connecting the neutral and the ground on your battery charger. They do that. Marine battery chargers have an isolated ground and neutral. They're not connected, as they should be. Because if you have a ground connected neutral and ground, you're bypassing your isolation transformer and your galvanic isolator. And I've gone on surveys where the underwater metals were completely destroyed, like I mean eaten away, gone. And yet they had a galvanic isolator on board. They basically bypass. It's like literally blowing a hole in your wall, protecting your boat. You're literally opening your boat to straight current corrosion. So never, ever, ever, ever bring a non-marine battery charger on board your boat. Now, if you do so, and you have straight current corrosion in your marina, and you've been fine over the years because you have a galvanic isolator, now you just brought the drawbridge down, You said to, the barbarians at the gate, you come on in and have fun. My underwater metals are for your use and your use only. And unrelated, I'm going to get a $20, $30, $40, $50, $60,000 bill for underwater metal damage. You could lose your keel, your skeg, your prop, your shaft, right? Haul out, you pull your boat, it looks like World War III underneath. It looks like literally termites went to town. And that is because you had invited straight current corrosion on your boat. Why? Because you decided to take a shortcut. And the shortcut was a non-marine model. Never, ever bring. Now, if you take those batteries out of the boat and you put them on the dock and you do them at home, there's no problem. But you remember, your boat is not your home. It's completely different than a car. You can take the batteries home and charge them at home, no problem. But you cannot have your batteries connected to your boat and connect a non-marine charger on those batteries. Black and white. And if you do so, well, it's going to be interesting. I can promise. Okay? Installation tips on battery chargers. We talked about this, right? Really important. 10% of the battery charger rate. I cannot emphasize enough how often I see folks where they have large battery banks and no one thought about looking at the battery charger. It'd be like building a third and fourth and fifth story to a traditional home where the basement was meant to support only one level. You can't just add levels to your house. You can't say, hey, you know what, let's do a high rise. I'm thinking the builder must have thought about me maybe doing a high rise. We're willing to spend the money upfront, unbeknownst to me, with no benefit to them, and they gave me a boat that will do anything I can ever imagine. Not gonna happen. No, builders don't do that because it's not prudent, financially unprudent. So why do? They build their chargers to the battery bank they put on the boat. You change the battery bank on your boat, you change the charger. There's just no way around it. No way around it. So the question is, how do you size a battery charger? You size a battery charger for the nominal battery capacity of all deep cycle batteries on your boat. So if you had, for example, 2 house battery banks, which is pretty rare nowadays, pretty rare. Nobody does that anymore. But let's say you had an inverter bank and a house battery bank and an engine starter battery. You would add up the nominal capacity, the rated capacity of your inverter bank, the rated capacity of your house bank. You would add them together. So if you had a 400 amp hour inverter bank, a 400 amp hour deep house bank, those are now 800 amp hour nominal rated capacity. You would need an 80 amp charger for that battery bank. Minimum. Remember, I did this presentation at Blue Waters this year in January, so 9-10 months ago. And the fellow hosting the presentation was a field engineer in Alberta. And he had it was so interesting. The way he was describing, and he was saying, the standards are the minimum. They're never what you shoot for, right? And that's what's so weird about the marine environment is people think that it's a lofty goal. This sort of like, well, you'll never get there, so don't really try. But if you're halfway to the standard, you're good. In the land world, like on land, people go beyond the code. The build is the minimum you need to do. It's not what you're targeting. And so 10% is minimum. You can go higher. You could do 15. Now, you can't go 400%, right? But like for a lead acid battery, it's going to be between 25% and 10. So I often do 15, 20%, right? But minimum is 10. The other thing too that's really popular is people are going to say, well, Jeff, my battery bank is larger than any inverter charger or charger that's available. Like, think about it. The larger charger you can buy right now at 12 volts is a 150 amp charger that comes with a 3,000 watt inverter charger. That's it. You can't get bigger. There's no single charger that is marine that is bigger than 150 amps at 12 volts. And it comes with an inverter charger. It's a 3,000 watt inverter charger. Jeff, my battery bank is bigger than 1,500 amp hours. I want to charge at a faster rate, and my battery bank is bigger. So what you end up doing is you end up stacking multiple chargers in parallel to increase the charge rate. So on some boats, I have 2 chargers running in parallel, 3 chargers running in parallel, right? Because some of the boats I'm doing, the battery banks are 3,000 amp hours. I can't get a 3,300 amp battery charger. So I start adding them, I stack them. Or some boats are going to have 2 inverter chargers on the wall, right? Big boats. 2 inverter chargers on the wall. Both inverters are either playing, they can give you double the inverter capacity and double the charging capacity. Not unusual. You'll have 2 chargers on the wall, 2 inverter chargers, each outputting 150. And now you're going to have, your charge rate is going to be 300 amps coming in your battery bank. So you can stack chargers. And you stack chargers to meet the minimum charge time or to get a lower charge time. For example, very common with a lot of boaters is, Jeff, I have a 1,000 amp hour battery bank and it takes forever to run those batteries back to 85%. I'm running my generator 8 hours a day. It's driving me and the missus crazy. We've got sailboaters as friends. We want to keep them as friends. You know, like we go in bays, you know, we don't like to have the sideways glances. We get it. 8 hours is unacceptable to run a generator. I'm just not comfortable with doing that. Help me bring my generator runtime less. Well, how you would do that is by stacking chargers. And so you add you have a 150, and then we might add another 100, and then another 100. And so I might get 350 amps of charge rate, right, into a Firefly battery bank, and it can take it no problem. Right? But I couldn't do 350 in 1,000, that's 35% in a flooded, but I can easily do that in a Firefly bank. And now the battery bank, instead of charging at 100 amp or 150 amp rate, it's charging at 350. So some cases I bring the generator runtime from 8 hours to 2 hours. That evokes an emotional response from people. I've had partners, their wives hugging me. It's like, oh my God, thank God. Where have you been all my life? I've been here all the time. I'm like, why haven't we met you for the last 4 years? I hate my generator. Now 2 hours a day, it's sort of reasonable, right? 2 hours a day, not too bad. 8 hours a day, at one point I asked myself, is it better just leave it all the time? Make it your normal? And at that point, it's sort of like, it never goes off. It's a generator on boat, you know? Like, and that's no problem. You sort of like, it's in the background. I'm going to lose my hearing, but it doesn't matter. You know, it's okay. So that's a way of doing that, and that's actually pretty common on trawlers. You know, we do that a lot on trawlers, and we'll just end up stacking multiple chargers. Yeah, question. Jeff, if I have a 1,000 amp hour battery bank, and you say that I should get a 100 amp battery charger, why is the implication? What if I only have a 50 amp charger? What's the implication? And that thought that you brought up, Marie, is exactly the reason why people don't follow rules. They think, well, what's the implication? It's just going to take twice as long to charge the battery bank. I mean, I'm charging at 50, before I was 100. It's just time. I've got time. When I connect to shore power, it can take the time you want. The challenge is if you do not have enough pressure, which is amps, on that charger to go to 100 amps when you're bulk charging, because it only matters in bulk, you will not re-energize the whole battery. You'll re-energize 99% of that battery, 98%. But the next time you go charging, that 2% that never got recharged the first time, or 1%, it's gone. Next time, you're charging 99 of 99. Next time it's 99 of 98.1. And then you start doing fractions of fractions of fractions of fractions. And that's where people like myself ask you, did your batteries die suddenly? No, they didn't die suddenly. They were just, I only had 2 years with them. I don't know why, it was just, there was nothing sudden, it was just, but now there's nothing left. Because if there's no sudden event, there's no catastrophic failure. Is that chronically you were recharging your batteries a little bit less. It's like giving you 100 calories less a day. If I had 100 calories less a day than I need, I wouldn't feel it. I'd live. But every day, 100 calories left, I'm going to die. I can't have less than I need. But and it won't be catastrophic. You won't see it on the voltmeter. Your battery monitor won't even notice. Everyone's going to be happy. But if you chronically undereat just by a little, it's not enough and you will die. And that not enough is because you're not charging at bulk rate at enough to re-energize all that surface area on that battery. So hence, you have to do 10% minimum. And every builder on earth does 10. I mean, it's sort of there. It's just what happens is the moment we get our boats, we're like, wow, that's not enough batteries. I need more batteries. You can't do this. And then you add more batteries, and then you don't think about the charger. Yeah, so the question is, if I have a 1,000 amp hour battery bank, and I have a 100 amp battery charger, will I meet my 10% requirement? Yes, you will. 10% is the minimum, and you will. Now, is it better 15? Yeah. 17, 18. The middle of a range is better. So if the range is 10 to 25, then you want to be around 18%. But 10% is good enough. It's the minimum. Bigger is better, but not too big, because then you're wasting your time, because the battery can't take that higher charge rate. You can't go higher than 25%. 18% would be a good number. If you're going to shoot the middle would be good. So do 180 amps on a 1,000 amp hour battery bank. The question is, if you've got a 1,000 amp hour deep cycle battery bank, and you have an 8D, for example, battery, and it's a 200 amp hour, it's not 200 amp hours, but it could be. It's a starter battery. It's, I don't know, they wouldn't measure a starter battery in amp hours. They would measure it in cold cranking amps. But, you know, let's call it is 200 amp hours, just because I know, but they don't label it on the box. They're going to call it 1,800 CCA. Do you have to worry about the engine battery? No, you don't. Because an engine battery never depletes below 99%, 98%. The 10% applies to the deep cycle portion. Because your engine start battery, or a starter battery, should never, ever, ever, ever be brought down below like 95%. If you use your starter battery as a deep cycle, well, A, you're going to ruin your battery so quickly, and or if you do it so often, like people that do it unbeknownst to them, your battery will explode. I mean, that's a good reason not to do it. An explosion is something, honestly, if you have your partner on the boat when a battery explodes, you're switching over to RVing. Like, it's guaranteed. Or it's in the cottage industry, or simply, we're staying home and we're going to explore gardening together. Like, it's not going to happen. Like there's no way. It's not, this was not part of the deal. Like, explosions are not part of the experience. So, yeah, don't worry about starter batteries. Starter batteries are never meant to be deep cycled, and so bulk doesn't ever apply to them, if it's wired properly. The question is, if you've got a dual purpose AGM battery and you're using it for engine, should you include that battery in your calculation of the minimum of 10%? No. It's only batteries that are used for deep cycle applications, ones that are going to go to 50% of capacity. So the question is, recommendations on inverter chargers, and I made recommendations on chargers. Whenever you're buying gear for your boat, if you've never heard of the brand and no one's ever heard of it, and people are like, oh, interesting, right? Code for what the hell have you done? Do not buy a brand that you've never heard of or never seen anywhere, okay? So you gotta go with things that don't have weird names that have never been heard. So you stick with the known stuff like Mastervolt, Magnum, Xantrax, Victron. You know, like before Trace, right, was huge. I mean, now it's Magnum. But like big names where they have something to lose, right? Where they don't want their reputation, right, to be lost. So go with well-reputed brands. Because remember, if your charger fails, not all chargers fail undercharging. Some fail overcharging. And you could overcharge a battery bank, it's gone. So not only do you lose your $2,000 charger, but you lose your $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 battery bank. And the manufacturer of the charger does not care. It only replaces the charger. It will never replace what it damaged. Hence, chargers are not to be taken lightly. Overcharging is a very serious problem if it happens. You're done. It's sort of like, honestly, being force-fed. If you're force-fed, you're going to explode. And the battery will explode, and there's no coming back from that.